Good morning, good evening, everyone. We will get started shortly, and a warm welcome to Carbonfuture webinar. We'll just give people another minute to join us, and then we will get started. Okay, I think we're ready to get started, so let's go to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. My name is Leila Toplik. I'm the Chief Communications and Trust Officer at Carbonfuture, and it is my pleasure to be the host for today's webinar. Today, we will talk about monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon removal and the important role that it plays in making carbon removal market more trustworthy, more efficient, and more scalable. And we will hear from the industry leaders about their real-world experiences with MRV. And it's my pleasure to welcome our speakers, Misha Repman, Senior Risk Manager at Swiss Re, Bena Fuchs, Chief Operating Officer at Puro.earth, Diego Justiniano, President of Extramat Green, and Duncan Kariuki, Co-founder and Chief Product Officer at Octavia Carbon. One thing to note, Duncan is actually joining us from their new direct air capture facility in Rift Valley in Kenya. So in case his video doesn't work, he's still with us. He will be answering the questions via audio, but for now we can see him. Welcome, Misha, Benno, Diego, and Duncan. On to the next slide. Now, here's a couple of things to know about how to engage both during the webinar and after the webinar. You can post your questions in the chat and also in the Q&A. I do want to thank many of you who sent questions through the registration, and we will get to some of those questions during the discussion. The session recording will be sent to all of you following the webinar, so by tomorrow. And you can follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter to hear about upcoming webinars. In fact, at the end of this webinar, we will be announcing the next webinar in our MRV series. Next slide. Now, here's what we're going to cover today. Just given that we have a very diverse group of participants in this webinar with varied knowledge of MRV, we'll kick off with a quick overview of what MRV is and also give you a quick update on the work that we're doing at Carbonfuture. Then we'll hear from our speakers, and that's where we'll spend most of our time today. We'll talk about how buyers are assessing carbon removal projects and what is the role of MRV in their decision-making. We'll talk about how our suppliers using MRV to access the market, to access the buyers for their carbon removal projects and to improve efficiency. And then we'll also talk about what is the role of the standards and how they collaborate with MRV providers. So a lot to cover, and much of this webinar is really shaped by the questions and topics that you have shared with us in advance. Next slide. Now, just to level set and make sure that everybody can follow along, let's quickly define what MRV is. These three letters stand for monitoring, reporting, and verification. MRV ensures that carbon removal activities are accurately monitored, that they are transparently reported, and they are independently verified. MRV essentially creates a comprehensive data trail from carbon capture to credit issuance. And this is actually key for having transparency on credit quality for the buyers and also having data for any audits and future compliance. Now, why is this necessary? Without a reliable way to verify carbon removal claims, there's really no way to guarantee that the promised climate benefits are real. This could put buyers and stakeholders at risk, not only financially, but also in terms of reputation. So MRV essentially ensures that carbon removal credits are legitimate, which builds trust and reduces risk for everyone involved. Now, let's take a look on the next slide at the carbon removal journey and specifically the MRV role in it. And this is quite simplified just to give you a sense of what is the role of MRV in this process. Standard like PURA, defines what data and documentation are needed to assess the quality of a CDR project. MRV, and in this example, I'm talking specifically about independent MRV. So independent MRV collects the data, the contracts, the chain of custody information from suppliers, and this could be via API integration with supplier ERP systems or IoT, and really ensures that all required information is available for third-party verification and certification. Now, if the MRV is digital, it can also flag anomalies so suppliers can optimize their projects and help with standardization of data. Now, verifiers, these are independent third-party validation and verification bodies that are accredited by standards. They receive that data and verify the project and issue a report. And then the standard reviews the report provided by the VVB, and if all requirements are met, issues a carbon removal credit. The credit is then listed on the standards registry with a unique ID and ready to be traded. And the verified carbon removal credit is sold to the companies that are looking to balance their emissions. So just for some context setting for the different roles and responsibilities, one thing that is important to note here, while there's verification mentioned in this name, MRV does not verify. It only supports verification by providing the data to the third-party verifiers. Going to the next slide. Now, there are different sort of flavors of MRV in the market today. So we thought it would be helpful to mention a few. This is a reflection in the sense of both a need for MRV and also the carbon removal market evolving or maturing. On the left-hand side, there's the example of MRV or data collection being done by a supplier. So how this works is a supplier reports all relevant carbon removal project data to the standard directly. Potential issue here could be that this model lacks independent oversight to ensure the data accuracy and also avoid potential conflicts of interest. Then another flavor of MRV in the market today is the one that might be done by a standard, which means that data collection is performed by a standard, which also they're responsible, as mentioned on the earlier slide, they're responsible for setting the rules and certifying carbon removal projects. Potential downside here is that as both rule setters and certifier standards could lower rigor to certify more projects, potentially compromising the integrity and the credibility of the carbon removal efforts. Now, there's also independent MRV, and this is conducted by independent third-party organization, oftentimes using digital technologies to ensure accuracy and efficiency. Now, what's the value here? By being independent from the supplier and from the standard, this type of MRV ensures unbiased data collection, eliminates any conflicts of interest, and protects confidentiality of the parties that are involved in this complex value chain. And if it's digital, this independent MRV can ensure more efficient and accurate verification through digital processes. At Carbonfuture, we operate the independent digital MRV. So if we go to the next slide, let's zoom in on this independent digital MRV. What are some of the key benefits to some of the key stakeholders in the carbon removal market? For the buyers, independent DMRV ensures the quality, reliability, and credibility of carbon removal credits. It provides ongoing visibility through digital into project performance, and which enables proactive issue management and safeguarding against potential delivery risks. For the suppliers, independent DMRV streamlines reporting and certification. It protects, again, confidentiality of the various parties involved in this value chain, and also it allows suppliers to adapt to evolving standards and future compliance frameworks. And then for the standards, a very important stakeholder in the carbon removal market, independent DMRV can simplify verification and certification processes by facilitating this kind of consistent, accurate data collection and reporting, while also improving efficiency in credit issuance with these digital processes. Now, if we go to the next slide, which is the last slide that I have for this context part of the webinar, just briefly, one example, as mentioned, of the independent DMRV is the work that we do at Carbonfuture. It's Carbonfuture MRV Plus. What's worth noting is that we've taken the MRV a step further with what we call MRV Plus to meet the needs specifically of the CDR suppliers and buyers. We've been doing this for the past 4 years. So what we noticed is that unlike traditional independent MRV systems, what is really important to be able to do is to provide early stage support for suppliers to get their projects off the ground. We also offer comprehensive due diligence of projects and also supplier operations, which ensures quality upstream. Our MRV Plus is designed to do automated data ingestion, data checks, which helps faster and more accurate verification by third-party verifiers. But it is important to be inclusive of all sorts of projects, including those that don't have digital infrastructure. So in addition to automation, we offer basically flexible data ingestion option that combines digital automation with human involvement and oversight. And then lastly, offering greater transparency while preserving confidentiality between the various parties involved and ensuring a streamlined and faster certification, which is something that suppliers care about. And in summary, we enable suppliers to track and optimize their CDR projects, share data directly with third-party verifiers, and for buyers to have a bit more confidence in what they're purchasing by having this data-driven transparency on credit quality. So with that, hopefully everybody's up to speed on what MRV is, why it's needed, what are some of the different options in the market today, and we'll actually dive now into the discussion and hear from the industry leaders about their real-world experiences with MRV. With that, I will ask each of the speakers to do a brief introduction on their work, on their organization's work in carbon removal and their interaction with MRV, and then we'll go straight into the questions. The first up is Misha from Swiss Re. Misha, over to you.
Thanks, Leila. Yes, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. It's a very technical panel, as you heard from Leila by now, and I try to make it as untechnical as possible. Because we have dirty hands. We went into these upcoming markets. We had discussions with the first providers of mitigation outcomes that are negative emissions and not just avoidance credits. We did that since 2003 as Swiss Re, one of the largest reinsurers of the world. So we are a financial institution, which puts us in a good position to start having these conversations on climate solutions and on compensation, on neutralization early. Simply for the fact that we have not so much operational emissions and our financial flows are a completely different topic, not the one of today. So we started in 2003 to compensate the operational emissions that we had in scope, that we could measure, that we could control well through back then. I think for the first time, the type of carbon avoidance credits that mentioned co-benefits as a thing. So these were World Bank funds, the Community Development Fund. The credits were up to $20 per ton, which was outworldly at the time, and after the collapse of Kyoto, again outworldly. And then we increased the level of integrity of quality even furthermore. We just required the proper standards until we said you have to go a step further. It's not that we should compensate and pay somebody else to avoid his or her emissions in our stead, but that if we are responsible for residual emissions, we ought to pay somebody to take it back out of the atmosphere immediately and store it durably. So that started in a program that we called CO2 Net Zero program in 2021. And this was funded by an internal carbon price, a stringent internal carbon price. We collect money from all over the world where we do business and spend it then on the type of carbon removal and also carbon offsets that we consider appropriate. We had to draft our own standard in this 2019-2018 period because there was just no standard, where we could delineate what is a good credit and what is a bad and what is an ugly one. But now we are way into that program. We charge currently $134 per ton for each ton that we still emit within the in-scope emissions that we have under control and measure, as mentioned. And this is not by far everything, but we can expand from here. And by 2030, this climbs to $200, and this is also the year when we want to do full neutralization of those in-scope emissions. So this is a bit our journey. We have different access paths to these emerging markets. We also feel that the first buyers also play quite a role in signaling the right demand signals, in being market creators. And the way to get this through your management is not making a mutualistic or altruistic story out of it, but to say, hey, it's going to be the next trillion-dollar industry, carbon removal. You better want to be out there early in order to ride the wave all the way through. Let's hand over to who's next, Diego?
Diego is next. Thank you so much, Misha. So Diego from Exomat Green.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you, Leila, and all the Carbonfuture team for having us here. It's great to be speaking in this very important panel. I'm Diego Justiniano. I'm the president and CEO of Exomat Green. Exomat Green, it's a division of Exomat, which is the largest wood exporter and producer of sustainable products in Bolivia. We started operations as Exomat Green in 2023, sorry. And in that time, or since that time, we have been able to scale up significantly and become number one producer and delivery company for biochar carbon credits in the world. We have 2 operational facilities, including the largest biochar facility in the world, and one more on planning phase, which we're going to begin in next year. We have currently over 65,000 tons of CO2 that has been removed from the atmosphere, and we have sold over 250,000 tons up so far. Next year, we plan on scaling up capacity to reach close to 360,000 tons for the phase 1 of our project. We have been able in this time so far to provide soil amendment with free biochar to over 7,000 hectares, mostly for indigenous and small farmers in Bolivia. We have a large customer base for our credits that include many of the Fortune 500 companies and in very diverse sectors. And we're here to basically share all the insights that we have on this quite interesting journey that we have been doing, and very open to all the questions that you guys have in the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Diego. And just a note for everyone listening, we just shared in the chat links to actually Swiss Re and Exomat case studies. So you can learn more both from Misha and Diego today, and then follow up and read about their journey or Swiss Re and Exomat's journey in the case studies that were just shared. And now, Duncan, you're next to talk about Octavia Carbon.
Hey everyone, thank you Lila and the rest of the Carbonfuture team for having me here. My name is Duncan Kariuki. I am the co-founder and CPO of Octavia Carbon. Octavia is the Global South's first direct air capture company. We develop, manufacture, and will soon deploy our proprietary direct air capture in Kenya's Rift Valley. We started our operations in 2022, and in that time we've developed everything from right from the material science to the engineering and the manufacturing, and are now building a project. So as Lila mentioned, that's where I am right now at our facility. We will have the first phase coming online by the end of the year. Really excited about this conversation to really talk about how we're thinking about our own digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, and what will we see it playing in the industry. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks so much, Duncan. We'll hear from you a bit later. And then finally, Benno to talk about Pro.Earth.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being here. So thanks a lot for having me. I'm really excited to speak in with this great panel about DMRV today. My name is Benno Fuchs. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Pro.Earth, and I'm dialing in from Munich, Germany, if anybody cares. So who are we? We are the leading standard for durable carbon removal. So we've been the first standard and registry focusing purely on carbon removal, carbon dioxide removal, no avoidance credits whatsoever. Thanks also, Leila, for describing a bit what the standard per se does, very well described. We are the ones who claim to set the standard and to set the overarching guidelines and methodologies of what we expect carbon removal activities to do and what data to deliver for us to understand, is it as Misha put it, a good, a bad, or a really bad project. We were founded in 2018, so we've been around for, given how nascent the market is, for quite a while already. We've got meanwhile 90 plus registered projects in basically all across the world in 20 plus countries. This year we have an issuance of roughly 500,000 tons already. So while we started relatively small, we are seeing quite a scale and quite an interest in the market of CDR, carbon removal supplies in the market. And what's really critical and important for us, and that's what we are going to speak about today with DMRV, is how do we make data accessible? How do we interpret data ourselves? How can we use systems that help us ingest data better to the best of our abilities to help us, but also to help buyers to eventually, and I think that's what we all want to do, bring funding into those projects and companies that actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. And I'm excited to talk about that today. Over to you, Leila.
Great. Thank you, Benna, and welcome. And with that, we'll actually move into the Q&A, which is why we're here, to share more about the work that each organization is doing and the role of MRV. We'll kick off with some of the questions that were pre-submitted. And again, thanks to those of you who took time to share what you're interested in hearing about today. And Misha, we'll go back to you first with a set of questions related to really how buyers are deciding to purchase CDR credits. And specifically from a buyer's perspective, if you can share what are the most critical factors when evaluating a CDR project. Another question that's come in, if you can talk about at the same time, how exactly does MRV affect carbon credit buyers' decisions?
Yeah, as mentioned, we are in a good position because I happen to have studied this carbon removal field. I have a PhD in it, and I then went off to work for Swiss Re. So, but not everybody had this in-house knowledge from the 2018 year on. But we could sit down and figure out what is actually important when we buy CDR, and we made from the beginning clear we are after the climate value, only secondarily about the nature and the people value. So as mentioned, we just have to get the climate value straight. Otherwise, any neutralization or compensation claim would be nullified. So in our first standard, we had 4 areas where we looked at. The first is integrity. That's where MRV plays a role. And it means everything. It means no harm. It means what method is applied. Is this solid? And methods were scarce until Puro showed up, right? What about the registry itself and also different hats? You know, are the method developers the same with the registry, the same with the MRV? So all of this is basically embedded in integrity, where MRV, in particular digital MRV, and in particular independent digital MRV, which is Carbonfuture's case, adds this extra level of safety. And I'm going to talk why this is so important. But so this is integrity. Second was durability that we looked at. Again, well, if you want to neutralize real emissions, you need real negative emissions. And the real negative emissions is not if the danger is just super huge that the next year my negative emission goes back in the air. So that tilted us a bit towards what you would then recognize as technological CDR solutions to begin with, to be on the safe side. Then scalability. And you have different ways of looking at this. Some would argue, well, if you have reached $100 per ton by 2030, you're worth becoming my supplier. I was always opposing this because it was too immature of a market and of a supply base in order to give them such stark prerequisites. And then, of course, what you do is everybody ticks the box, yes, I'm going to be at $100, and then the whole world starts thinking CDR costs $100 in 2030, which I can assure you it won't. Okay. And the closer we get to 2030, the more I'm proven right. So durability, scalability, we rather looked at, almost in a planetary boundary way, what's actually still there in 2050 and can play that key role for the second half of the century that negative emissions are supposed to play. And again, that tilted us a bit towards the technological solutions and not towards the nature-based solutions to begin with. And the last, this was co-benefits, right? So if you have a choice, if you are ever in the world of having a choice between a credit that can demonstrate, again, through MRV, hopefully, some co-benefits, so nature value and people value, go for it. Why not? Why shouldn't you? This is, for the first 20 years of the carbon markets, where you could really make a difference, where you could really have some storytelling behind. Now, we're not in a storytelling world anymore with carbon markets. It's a pre-compliance market. It's not a term I invented, but I really like it. It's a pre-compliance market. We really have to get things right. We have to do carbon accounting right. There is scrutiny all over. There is a pro-ESG movement and an anti-ESG movement, and there is a legislator who comes either on either of the two sides. And in that respect, as mentioned, we would still be in the phase where we look at climate value predominantly. But these are the four that we have looked at in order to judge or to evaluate projects. Now, just one more thing on how we could do that. As a financial institution, we were lucky of having a so-called ESG risk framework in place. So whatever transaction we do financially, wherever we direct our financial flows to, we run that. So we have some red, green, amber system, automatic pop-ups. You need to submit as a referral because you're going to do a deal in that industry, in this country, or with this pre-flagged client even. And then we have sustainability experts who check, and they can even go to controversies. So they check what media reports have been out there. And when we are in doubt, we can run that system and explore this as if it were a financial transaction. With all the legal scrutiny behind financial transactions, we could apply the same for CDR or whatever carbon project. So that put us again in a good position to be first out, even already five years ago.
Thanks, Misha, for sharing the four criteria. If you don't mind just going back to the integrity piece, because that is, as one of the questions is really asking, how exactly does MRV affect your decision and potentially related to the integrity criteria?
Yeah, the answer was a bit hidden in my long speech. We started by applying our internal standard, by applying our internal checks. And the first controversies were hitting us, where we said, well, you have sourced in this project, there is some problems with human rights, didn't you check? And our internal risk managers come back and say, well, where is the due diligence that you did? And then we say, well, we use this standard because it's the best standard out there. And we have to rely on their judgment, on their due diligence, so that we don't have to do that with each and every project. That would be completely out. So in this world where you have the media coming after you, and I don't have to talk about the frenzy, every outlet found another scandal about some tiny project rather than talking about big oil and gas mergers. In this world, we really had to go an extra level, and we went to a credit rating agency, and we pay now to get this additional judgment of the quality of a credit, and an independent MRV that we can point to is this top layer that protects us. So it's a cover my peep extra layer of safety that we really rely upon right now. Otherwise, we would get many of our actions and many of purchases blocked. So we even do that with projects. We are in a buyer's club, for example, and we even do it with projects that are proposed in that buyer's club, where you have an intermediary creating the project pipeline and not yourself going out to look for good projects, or not you on a secondary market just buying what the broker suggests. But also in this buyer's club, we have these extra eyes on the projects just to avoid to do something wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Misha. So for those of you who asked, clearly MRV is critical in terms of providing transparency on the credit quality, which is essential for both managing the financial risk and reputational risk, as Misha noted. With that, actually moving on to the supply side. So another question that came through was really asking specifically what steps Duncan and Diego, you as CDR suppliers, are taking when selecting an MRV provider. What are your considerations? So Duncan, let's start with you and then go to Diego.
Yeah. So in selecting or at least the process that we went through internally in selecting our MRV provider, first of all, the thing we wanted to do is first understand, or at least we articulated why we wanted to do this externally. It's possible, as you mentioned, Laila, to do this internally and do the MRV supplier, make the MRV supplier led. So for us, the reason was mostly because we wanted to make our carbon removal practical for the buyer. Many of the buyers are not seated here in Kenya. They can't easily visit us. And so we had the buyer in mind when we were making this choice at the very start. And so if our objective was, and our vision for this is that if Misha wants to buy a credit from Octavia that's being originated in Kenya, he can easily trace it right from the CO2 molecule being pulled from the air to where it's going to be stored. So that was the first reason, or list that we had. And we also wanted to remove that complexity and make it easier for buyers who may not be as familiar with dark as most of the sophisticated buyers tend to be. So starting with that, then we went through the process of now deciding how we're going to do this with a third party and what are some of the criteria we look for. It's no secret we are working on this with Carbonfuture, and the reason for this is also Carbonfuture has that experience with buyers. And at the time, we wanted people who can also understand, because Carbonfuture has a brokerage arm, understand what buyers need and what type of product will make this easier for us to sell the credits into the market and drive that highest level of quality and trust. So those are some of the criteria that we looked at. And we also wanted, as a hardware company, we wanted people with very good experience on the software side, and to make this as easy as possible for anyone to really trace those CO2 molecules all the way to the storage location, and then even the monitoring that happens thereafter. It's still a work in progress, and it's something that we are developing together, but that's how we thought about it when we made this choice.
Great, thanks so much, Duncan. So Diego, Duncan just mentioned a couple of things. One is having this kind of comprehensive data trail, as Duncan noted, from the molecule all the way to the credit. And then also knowing what buyers care about. So being able to access the market and signal that their credits are high quality. What would you add from Extramat's perspective? What criteria are you using to select an MRV?
So first of all, I think that you have to do a market research. So upon doing the market research, you should do, of course, everything, your research online, attend events, the conferences there are, get references from suppliers that are already on the market. And based on all your market research, you should find a MRV that suits your needs, that can attend your needs, which are going to be different from supplier to supplier, from different industries, whatever you're doing. In our case, we selected Carbonfuture because it was a platform, the MRV process or digital MRV process, that was more reliable, that it was well known, that it had a good market reputation, that brought transparency into the process, and that we were able to integrate this on an efficient manner into our systems. We have built-in systems that control all our production, and we have been able to do an integration via API with the Carbonfuture DMRV, so that we can add this extra layer of transparency and security to our customers, because in this market is something that's very highly valued, is that there is integrity, you show trustworthiness, And I think that that's the reason that you need to do all your research, and why we, at least as Exxon and Green, believe that this should be done by an independent third party and not done in-house, so that you can bring this extra layer of transparency to the customer base, which at the end of the day is going to be buying your carbon credit, and there's a lot of trustworthiness on that.
Thanks, Diego. So you've highlighted transparency, and specifically for buyers, in order to access the kind of be able to actually sell your the credits coming out of your project, and also the convenience because of the digital integration. One of the things that you're touching on is actually part of the next question, which is, why is it important for MRV to be independent from suppliers? So you've touched on the transparency and just having an independent party do the data collection. And Benno, I want to come to you, because there's also the second part of that question is like, why is it important for MRV to be independent from a standard?
Yes, very happy to answer that. So as Chief Operating Officer, it's my team's roles to make sure that the data we receive are being processed properly, and that we go through the entire certification process, which means we review data first, we then sort of make our first assessments, because the multitude of projects with the first submission of data would not pass an audit. So we need to make sure that we check the quality up front, that we send the data onwards to a verification validation body. We receive the data back and forth, and this process of just using and handling data is 95% of the time of the biggest teams within Puro, basically. And while we do and will continue to offer for really early stage projects no MRV, like submitting data to us without MRV tools, it is making it so much easier to handle data when it comes from a standardized and automatized partner or MRV provider. And we also asked ourselves the question, should we be offering that as a standard ourselves? But then this question arises of the conflict of interest. Is it us who set the rules, who issue credits? Is it then also us who should be collecting the data? And our decision was no, we shouldn't be the ones sort of going with an API into the systems of our suppliers, fetching data from there, harnessing and collecting them, and sort of processing the data that way. We believe that wherever it's efficient, we don't add cost, because obviously cost is always a factor. As long as we can stay efficient, we very much welcome a new pair of eyes that goes into there, that brings in new expertise that we might not have, because there's a plethora of methodologies, a plethora of different types of carbon removal. So we want to make sure that we allow, in an ecosystem market approach, for knowledge to be grown as quickly as possible. And if there are experts that are really good in supporting suppliers with getting data to us, while that does not increase cost, but rather increase the efficiency, that is something we very much want to support with. That is why we think that in future, MRV will play a bigger role, and it's independent MRV that it needs to be. So we don't think that, so put it the other way around, we think there would be a conflict of interest if we were the only ones to harness the data directly from our suppliers.
Thanks, Benno. So I think what's important to just put a fine point on is distributor accountability matters for scaling of this market as the market matures, and also some of this efficiency and data being key to, again, the scalability of the market. What I want to come back to the demand side of the market, Misha, with a question for you. So this participant who pre-submitted, actually, the question states that there are only a few actual CDR buyers today. And we know that from CDR.FYI, I think there were like 188 buyers in 2023, and only 14 bought over 10,000 tons. And the note here is that this actually could slow down adoption of MRV systems. Misha, the question for you is, what could encourage more companies to invest in CDR?
It's a $100 million question, right? And we are increasingly getting nervous about this monopsony, that the same 5 buyers are doing these purchases and try to outcompete themselves with slightly bigger purchases the next year. What this does is it scares off the 5,000 that should follow. While it looks like everybody's super helpful in providing advice, it's highly unlikely that anybody can follow a Swiss Re approach or a Microsoft approach or a Stripe or Shopify approach, right? Now, why is nobody buying this? The answer is the V in VCM, because it's voluntary. Who is incentivizing a private sector player to basically dedicate climate finance to begin with, and dedicate climate finance to negative emissions? We have missed the chance with the one and only international standard setter that sets climate target standards for all sectors, which is SBTi by now. We've also missed earlier the chance to have this being a UN organization and not an NGO. It would have saved us also a bit of problems. We don't really see regulators picking that up so much. I come from Switzerland, and there is plain language. We have a net zero law, actually, so bigger corporates have to be net zero by 2050. And there is an idea on how much removals that will require, but again, not for financial sector players, how much financial flows you should dedicate, etc., etc. The role of government will at some point take over the V, so it's no longer voluntary, but it will be a compliance question in order to demonstrate in your climate transition plan what you are about to undertake to get to the net zero. So there I'm hopeful, and there are people who are thinking, are there other ways to accelerate the role of government? Of course, through government procurement. That would help greatly, but also maybe through some incentivization schemes, not just throwing money at climate solution providers, but also through offering tax credits, through offering preferred vendor base to government work when companies can show that they do voluntary purchases. So we, of course, also are hampered by all these quality controversies. That's clear. MRV will help, and the more you can make your case, Leila and team, the better. So this adds to this perception of, no, there is actually not so much reputational risk, and there is no reason to be on the fence. But yeah, we are on the fence right now, and we can only wait for better times. And while I believe personally that maybe 3-4 years ago when we started all of that, time was not ripe to talk about it so much. Now time would be ripe to go out and talk about the first learnings. And then again, we are in generally a position that wait and see is the safer spot than going out, lean forward, try to say something without giving an advice that could be used against you, etc. So it's not easy to convince people. My last line of advice for this question would then always be, try not to be alone. Try to have a partner like Carbonfuture. So we did that from your early days, and now profiting from the DMRV. But you can also go and try to find the buyers club. There are not many right now, and some do not require DMRV whatsoever. But nevertheless, at least you're not alone, because you have co-fellows who buy with you, and you don't have to do all this transactional effort in order to get to your credit purchases. And you can source impactfully long term, which is what the supply side really needs. That we commit now to pay a price so that they can scale up and find financiers to do the debt finance.
Yeah, thanks so much, Misha. So many actually really valuable points. One thing just to emphasize is this evolution of the market. And while the early movers and adopters and market builders like yourself from Swiss Re needed to invest potentially quite a bit in order to really have the deep understanding of the space and potentially have people that are experts on staff, what you're pointing out is that there are different access paths for others to join without needing to have that in-house expertise. And there's also the infrastructure that has been built out since then with standards, with DMRV that can help actually de-risk these purchases so that the companies, kind of the next wave of buyers, can get started with more confidence and without needing to have the in-house expertise. I think that's a super important point. Before we go to one of the live questions, Diego, which I want to ask you related to biochar, there was another question that touches on something that Misha mentioned, which is this voluntary carbon market and trust in voluntary carbon market. How can, from your perspective, standard plus MRV systems support rebuilding trust in the voluntary carbon market?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very, very tough question, but I think it's maybe not MRV in the first place, but data that we need to regain trust. But MRV is a brilliant vehicle of data because it just makes the treating, specifically if it's the digitized version of data, so much easier. As I've said in the beginning, all the data so all the production data, LCA data, everything that might be interesting for a buyer finally, those data go over our desks, and they have been doing that for the last six years or so, but in a huge variety, because we shouldn't forget that we are still in a very nascent market, and many projects do what they do for the first time, and that's hundreds of them. And just because somebody is really good in removing carbon, they might not necessarily be really good in having a very diligent ERP system or like very standardized ways of sort of sending data to us. So while we in our standard bubble, we see the data, we realize more and more that it might be also about just visualization of that and making it easier for externals to understand the data. We see that very much so when speaking to rating agencies, for example, that have requirements of specific data they just want to see, that we realize we actually have them, but we don't make them accessible and ingestible in a way quickly and easily enough. And MRV will play a major role for us in the future. So what I've said in the beginning is that we will continue to allow early stage suppliers to submit data to us directly, even though it is very laborious for us and it takes a lot of work. I see there's not really a way around in the future if we want to get to a quickly scaling and highly transparent market of just leaving more data trails, of having more standardized data collection, thus automatized data collection, which should reduce the cost of certification, which eventually will have an effect on prices as well, which should increase the value of the credits, of the corks, as we call them, the CO2 removal certificates, because it gives you more tangibility to that. So to summarize, I think it's data that we need to make accessible to those who want to ingest them, for those who want to interpret them. And MRV is the vehicle for us to both get the data ourselves, interpret it, and send it on to whoever the next stakeholders will be.
Great, thanks so much, Benno, and also for just painting the picture of the market evolution and the fact that while you are still allowing for the submission of the data by suppliers, ultimately you see the market evolving in order to scale and be more efficient, more trustworthy towards having this distributed accountability and having independent and also digital MRV. Super helpful. Diego, I want to come to you and specifically on the biochar the side of the durable carbon removal, and then Duncan, related question for you for DAC. So for industrial biochar project, this is a question from the chat. Should DMRV be installed in the pyrolyzer, or can we add it later? And how much will it affect the credits?
So based on our experience, we implemented it after the pyrolyzer. It's not within the pyrolyzer, the DMRV. What we do on our experience, it's you have to have precise data. You have to have a unit of packaging, whatever unit of packaging you use. And based on that information, which has to be, again, precise, you can start with a digital MRV process from there on, which basically is going to account for everything that it was produced and that's going to be delivered. Because one very important part on the biochar credit is that you don't get to collect your credit until it's applied on the soil, and it's considered a permanent solution for the hundreds of years that it's validated by the standard, which is pure.earth right now. So basically at that point, you can install it later.
Super helpful. Thank you for that. And Duncan, you have the opportunity to actually build with DMRV in mind from the ground up. In fact, you are the facility that will go online later this year in the Rift Valley. How are you actually thinking about this integration between Octavia systems and your storage sites, of course, and the use of digital and specifically integration with digital MRV?
So whenever building any dark facility, it's a fully engineered facility, so it's riddled with sensors all over. And for us, basically the things when we're starting out this project, part of the engineering work is selecting those sensors that will measure all the CO2 that we capture, that will also track our LCA data, things like the energy consumption that we have, the degradation of our solvent. And so we basically developed an MRV plan based on that, and ensured that as we do the selection for the instruments for the engineering side, because this plant has so many instruments, those that we use just for tracking normal operations of the plant, those that we use for safety, we had specifically those that we wanted for MRV. And so basically with that in mind, we designed the plant based on that. And now the work that we are actually doing with Carbonfuture is how we share that data, because these are millions of data points a day, and how that data can be processed and then passed along to the certifiers and eventually the third-party auditors. That's part of the work that we do. And I think it's extremely important, especially on tracking the consumption over the lifetime, because this plant will run for more than 10 years, and we only sell net CO2 removed. So we really have to track what are the embodied emissions during the operation of the plant. And for us, most of that is the energy that we use, the solvent degradation, and then make sure we discount that from the removals that we have.
Great, thanks, Duncan. Misha, I see you're off mute. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm constantly off mute because I'm in such a well-protected environment here. Nobody can hear me.
Fantastic. So Duncan and Diego, just to be super actionable and practical for the suppliers on this call, what would be just your kind of key go-do and guidance to those looking to leverage or work with independent DMRV? Diego first, maybe.
Sure. So my advice to suppliers, which are going to be coming online and selecting a DMRV process, or partners in this case, it's to do your market research, see what actually the supplier of the DMRV is offering, that it's well known on the market, it has credibility on the market. And with that being said, it adapts to your systems of operation. You don't have to change your systems. You have to find someone that's adaptable to you. And that's what we found in Carbonfuture, that they were able to adapt to our systems of operation and manage to help us run more efficiently. And like Benno was explaining, help us sort the data easier, more precisely, so we can send it on a monthly basis, which is how we do our declarations to Puro.Earth. So that it can be done on a more efficiently manner, and also layer, putting this extra layer of transparency as well. So therefore, I would say do your market research, see that it fits your needs, and with that in hand, just go for it, because it's a way to go. It's the way of the future, to have a third party verify your data before it's submitted. It's an extra layer of transparency that the buyers will value for sure.
Thanks, Diego. And just to emphasize here, MRV is not verifying, but yes, to your point, it's collecting that data. It is that convenience that you mentioned, and then providing that data to a third-party verifier. Thanks very much, Duncan. Anything else to add in terms of the guidance to the suppliers vis-a-vis working with MRV?
Not much to add. I would say the most important thing is to just start. Nothing will be perfect in the beginning, and the only way to get it to a system that will work for all parties involved, the certifier, the auditor, the buyer, is to just get started. So that's the approach that we've taken to this, and we are just adding layers as we go.
Excellent. With that, just also a couple of questions in the chat. One thing that I want to note is that there's some questions that are quite detailed that we'll actually leave for one of the webinars that we're going to do specifically for the suppliers and onboarding suppliers to MRV. There's a question about who is the independent third party, and yes, in this case, It would be independent MRV, because we're talking about distributor accountability. We're talking about standards that are really defining the rules, like what data is required to assess the quality. We're talking about somebody who's actually collecting that data, then having third-party verifiers verify that data, and back to the standards to certify. And then we have buyers like Swiss Re that are actually buying these credits to reach their net zero goals and to balance their emissions. Benno and Misha, as we're coming almost to the end of the webinar, I want to make sure to also ask the same question to you. What is your Benno guidance specifically to the suppliers with regards to working with the standards and MRV?
Yes, thanks. I'll try to keep it short. I think what's really important is that however great MRV is and however great standards are, let's not have blind trust. Let's reflect on data. Let's reflect on what we see. Let's scrutinize what we see, because that is what we need as a standard. That is what MRV providers need. Let's work together on data, on improving, because it's a journey. It's not that we've got this one system that will now be the silver bullet and solve all the problems, but let's work constructively as an ecosystem together to increase the quality, to show points where data quality might not be good enough, and work together on scaling the carbon removal market by adding trust and by improving our systems. So not just blind trust, but sort of constructive collaboration. That would be my advice.
Fantastic. And this constant emphasis on data, which is key to having that, again, confidence in the credit quality. Misha, you mentioned the kind of what I think you alluded to, which is that World Economic Forum's best practices guide that you contributed to. What would be, from either drawing from that or from your experience at Swiss Re, what would be your guidance to the group that is quite diverse, both suppliers and buyers in this call, related to the topic of this discussion, which is MRV?
Maybe something interesting to explore. I'm just thinking loud here, right? But something interesting to explore is to see, so this concept of buyer clubs, right? And this is for suppliers as interesting as for buyers. So both need to aggregate somehow. If you can make that a USP of the next buyers club, then you say we have a DMRV buyers club, and in order to be part of the supply side here, you need to do DMRV, to add this layer up front, and then go and market it that way. Because buyers clubs are particularly interesting for going an extra mile in terms of cost, reason of shared cost, right? It's not you who go for the biggest bang for the buck, but you can rely that you're not the only, excuse my French again, idiot to pay this high first movers price that I presume is today, when EMRV is not standard, you would still pay if you go for this extra layer of quality. So that could be something interesting, and that's something that is described. It's one of the key access routes to this carbon removal market in the publication that you just mentioned, and then you may want to share the link. I really like the accessibility for buyers, even those who have never bothered or are really new to the field. What you can do. I also found it striking that even Duncan tests this right away. So it was not a question for him to go for it. Although you would read in the literature that for DAC, for direct air capture, you just install a flow meter, and then this is the most MRV-able CDR that's out there. And we ourselves, we would argue, look, DMRV puts, for example, biochar on par with DUC. But Duncan has all reasons to believe that his product will also benefit from that push in credibility and in reduced reputational risks for buyers, so that he goes for this solution. That I found, that's what I really learned here in this webinar. And in that respect, I think you're off to a big thing, and you might really want to find distribution channels that scale.
Great, thanks so much, Misha. Very important idea. It's just to wrap up this discussion as we move into announcing our next webinar. So some of the kind of key points. One is MRV is a requirement for decisions for the buyers to have that transparency on credit quality and to have the data trail. It is something that is also needed by suppliers of various durable carbon removal technologies, as we heard from Diego and from Duncan. All sorts of benefits from being able to access the market to find the buyers and give them confidence that what they're buying is de-risked, but also efficiency and convenience and the future-proofing. And then on the standard side, having that third party do the data collection, standardization, and provide it also to the third-party verifiers is key. It's also key because all of us on this call want to scale this market efficiently and make it into a really a market that is contributing to the climate goals. With that, just a quick announcement of the next webinar, and a huge thanks to Misha, to Benno, to Diego, and Duncan for joining us today, for sharing their real-world experiences with regards to this important component of carbon removal market. Next month, we'll actually hear government perspective and how governments can ensure trust and transparency in carbon removal. So we'll be hearing from the US DOE, we'll also hear from the European Commission and some fantastic experts in the policy space. This will be hosted by our senior policy advisor, Sebastian Manhart. So we'll continue the discussion about MRV. And in November, we'll have a webinar that is focused specifically on some of the questions raised by suppliers regarding the MRV. So with that, very much thank you for all the questions, for your engagement, and thank you to Misha, Benno, Diego, and Duncan for sharing their expertise. On behalf of Carbonfuture, thanks for joining. You'll be receiving the recording in a follow-up email. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Leila.
Thank you, Leila and Carbonfuture team.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.